Welcome back, Register audience. Welcome to our latest Regcast today. We're talking about hyper-converged systems. We talked a little bit about converged systems last year. Well, now it's got even better. It's hyper-converged. What's the difference? You're going to find out in a little while. Now, who's going to help us find out about that? Well, joining us from HP, Marcus, first time in the studio.
Absolutely. Good morning, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to join you.
Are you enjoying it so far?
Absolutely.
It's a terrific place. Now, tell me, what do you do at HP?
So my role at the moment is I'm a business development manager working specifically around our software-defined storage solutions, and that incorporates our hyper-converged proposition. Joined HP back in 2008 when they acquired a company called Left Hand Networks, which actually provides the intellectual property that drives this platform today.
You've been around the industry a bit, haven't you? I heard you reminiscing with Tony.
A long time, yes. So I think this is about year 26 for me, so over 25 years specifically in storage, typically working with US startup new technology companies back from the late 80s with actually a tape company called Exabyte, and probably the last 15 years working with companies whose storage systems were software defined, actually before the industry even referred to them as such.
So just go show, there's nothing new, is there?
There's always something evolving, I think, and sometimes we actually have to just put a stake in the ground and take stock of where we're up to and where we can go in the future.
So this is our stake in the ground day?
Hopefully.
Okay, that's great. Tony, welcome back to the studio.
Thank you very much, Tim. Always good to be here.
Yes, Marcus has been in the business even longer than you. Not longer than you.
No one has
been in the business longer than you.
No, I'm afraid I did some maths in my head just now and thought, okay, it's over 30 years now. So,
oh dear, yeah.
Bad.
So, but this one, now this, I am always saying this to you these days actually, but this is actually another one that you quite like, this subject, don't you?
It's an area that's got lots of interest in it and a lot of misunderstanding. So yes, it's something we're keen on.
Okay, so in a minute we will find out exactly what you think about it, because you've made another one of your special videos with that.
We have indeed, yes. Stal and I've done that,
and that's good. But first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. You will see from our interface today that there is a place for you to ask questions. Please ask questions. The guys in the studio will answer the questions. I will make sure that they do. If they try to avoid them, then I'll tell them to stop avoiding the question. Let us know what you think about this afterwards, but wait until you see it first. Wait until you see what the Regcast is first before you decide whether it's good or not. So first of all, Tony, we're going to get to your video that you made with Dale explaining hyper-converged systems, the difference in converged, hyper-converged, all things like that, and why you might want to need them. So let's have a look at what the guys came up with. So let's have a look at the video.
My name is Dale Vile.
My name is Tony Locke.
And we're here today to talk about hyper-converged systems. What are they and where do they fit? Really just put a bit of context around a discussion which has got pretty hot in the industry quite recently. So Tony, to kick us off, why do Reg readers care about this whole discussion?
The Reg readers tell us all the time, essentially every time we survey them and ask them questions, that they have very complicated infrastructures in place at the moment still, even today. So fractured systems, lots of silos, and a mix of new, very up-to-date modern equipment going through to very legacy stuff that's years and years old. So very complex to manage, very difficult to look after. That in turn is augmented by the fact that the management tools and processes that they have in place have maybe been under-resourced. The investment hasn't gone into the management side at all, which means that there's often a lack of skills in using the management technologies, or just a lack of skills because of the training that's not been provided to allow people to look after these very fragmented infrastructures, especially with the additional challenges that large-scale virtualization has brought to things. So really it's a case that, as in many areas of IT, it's been very difficult to make a case for new management tools in particular.
Okay, so that makes sense, but that sounds like very much an internal IT perspective. If we were to look at this from a business point of view, what does it translate to? What would business people care about in this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to a number of issues. The most visible ones are to do with, the hardware costs. Essentially, we're running IT kit that's maybe more expensive than it should be. That's combined often perhaps with the even larger problem of software licensing fees that are maybe higher than they could be if we'd had some more consolidated systems. Coupled to both of those is the high cost of maintenance and support, both in terms of the vendor contracts to look after things, but also, our own staff time to keep things running. So lots of management overhead in that. And really, these things all combine to be visible very, very clearly in terms of often service level shortfalls. So the business really needs better service levels than we're being able to provide them with at the moment.
So by service levels, what do you mean? Are you talking about things like performance, availability, responding quickly to change requests, that kind of thing?
Absolutely, all of the above.
So if that's the as-is situation, then I know we've done a bit of future visioning with the Reg guys, haven't we? What do they tell us when we talk about how things should be in an ideal world?
They tell us very clearly over many years that they'd like to move forwards to having a much more flexible infrastructure in place that can meet lots of those service level issues that we just talked about, that's very responsive to change and makes optimal use of the assets so that they can, again, keep a very good control on the hardware side of things, and that's economically efficient to run. Coupled with that, obviously, very clearly, is the need to have very simple management to look after things, to try and reduce some of that management complexity that's inherent in the IT systems that we have. And more, we're seeing a very strong desire for as much automation as possible to make things easier to keep running as we scale and scale ever upwards. And this really means that we can move towards having a vision of delivering IT services rather than managing the IT infrastructure. So working very much on a service level agenda where the service levels are things that are meaningful to the business users rather than simply the stuff that we could always measure on the hardware. And some of that's now being surfacing in terms of, chargeback and showback or blameback type measures that are being put on the services that are being delivered, along with the costs of delivering those services, to try and get the end users to understand more of what's going on in internal IT.
Okay, so basically we've got the mirror image here of the problem discussion that we had earlier on. Now, we've talked obviously over the last few years about various ways in which we can start tackling some of the issues and driving towards that kind of vision that you've just outlined. The problem is, though, it's very difficult sometimes to distinguish between what might be considered as, let's just call it marketing speak for the sake of politeness, and actually real world advancement in terms of being able to do genuinely new stuff in new and different ways. Against that background, obviously, we're talking about hyper-converged here today. Can you give us a quick view of where does hyper-converged fit in the overall scheme of things? How do we get to this conversation?
And we've basically got to this point in time via a number of things that have been going on in IT. We started off with the whole projects looked at doing hardware consolidation and pooling of server and storage capacity to give us some form of unified hardware management and much simpler platforms to look after. They, in turn, drove a lot of those cost benefits that we talked about earlier, and additionally provided the greater flexibility and efficiency. So very much able to deliver services rapidly in response to requests from users or to change things quickly. And that means that part of the things that we've happened there, that the Reg readers have told us about, and we've done a lot of, to begin with, static virtualization. We just took existing platforms, turned them into virtual machines that ran in a very fixed mode. Increasingly, that's been moved to a much more dynamic position where we can maybe add new virtual machines in response to user demand, take them away, maybe scale the virtual machines independently. And these have often been built on top of converged and hyper-converged platforms.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of phrases there, converged and hyper-converged. I can imagine some marketing guy in a room thinking, we've got this next campaign to run. Converge seems to be something which people seem to be responding to. Let's stick the word hyper in front of it, and it just sounds like we're doing more and better. But what does it mean in practice, Tony? Talk us through that.
Well, there is in some of the vendors absolutely that case going on, but really what we've got here is on the left-hand side of the chart as we're looking at it, you can see the traditional landscape where essentially everything was in a silo, so physical compute, physical storage. On top of that, we then tried to add these virtualization layers to give us a bit more flexibility, a bit more optimization to support those applications and workloads. In the converged infrastructure, what happened there was we tried to combine the hardware management, so both the compute, the networking, and the storage together as a single element, layering on top of that the virtualized systems management tools, again, with our applications and workloads often virtualized sitting on top of that. But some of them could be physical, just going straight into that underlying physical platforms. The hyper-converged landscape really just takes things one layer further in terms of that convergence. So instead of having the physical compute and the physical storage basically being separate entities that were linked together, that they're now much more tightly integrated in the first place. So they're very much converged as compute and storage platforms tied in with the networking, with that virtualization layer on top there to just, again, try and simplify the management down as much as possible. And for many people, that actually means that the hyper in hyper-converged has come to mean the hypervisor level. So we're treating things very much at the virtual machine level now, rather than worrying about what's sitting underneath it.
Okay. Now, this looks very much like a black box architecture to me, and black boxes are obviously good for some things, but they also have downsides. So is that the case here?
Absolutely. It's the same with all type of appliances, and that's essentially what we're talking about here. The appliances come in a number of different shapes and forms, but we have some advantages and some potential disadvantages. And obviously, it's down to the red readers to work out how these apply in their own scenarios. On the positive side of things, we've clearly got the rapid and easy deployment methodology associated with these appliances, coupled with especially the simplified management side. So those two are very easy for the red readers to understand. They're things that we've been looking for a long time. Perhaps something that's maybe less visible is this concept of having actually simplified commercials. We've got fewer contracts to actually get through procurement in the first place to make our lives easier. But importantly, underlying everything, of course, is the idea that we've got a single vendor responsible for everything in the stack there. So that the proverbial one throat to choke.
Well, that sounds pretty attractive. So what's the downside of that?
We've got much less ability to tune and modify things. So we've got less granular control over the physical hardware that sits in there. This in turn means that when we try to scale the platform, we're linked essentially to the incremental ratios of compute and storage that are provided by the vendor. This means in particular that whilst this type of platform may be great for many types of, very general IT workloads, that they're clearly not suitable for more specialist areas, whether that's, high performance computing, perhaps some big data analytics, things like this, where you might want much more flexibility in the compute and the storage side of things. And of course, the big question for everybody is, does this mean I'm locked into a single vendor? So that, can I actually move my systems around whenever I want to? Can I only buy from one person? Are they going to keep me, locked in tightly and with some financial consequences for me?
Okay, so it sounds as if hyper-converged is moving the game on from converged, but it's not necessarily always a straight replacement for converged systems. It sounds to me as if there might be a case for using the two side by side, depending on the mix of requirements you have.
Absolutely. And in fact, there might be a case to actually use all three infrastructures side by side, so that, traditional siloed infrastructure might be great for some of your more specialist workloads, whereas, converged would be good for others, and the hyper-converged would be good for another group of solutions.
Well, Tony, that sounds like a whole other conversation again, but in the meantime, you've given us a great overview of where hyper-converged fits into the overall scheme of things in general. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Dale.
Well, welcome back, everyone. And I must say sorry to Cesar, who said that my shirt is nice, but it is impossible for streaming. So I'm terribly sorry about that. I never thought, and I promise I will never wear this shirt in the studio again. I do appreciate that. Now we're back in the room, and that was, I tell you, that was quite some intro you did there, Tony. There was,
yeah, I apologise.
There was a lot in it, so there's a lot to digest. But luckily, we have the two of you to help with this. Marcus, okay, so we need to come to you now. Why have converged systems become a thing in the last couple of years that we need to talk about and need to take seriously?
Well, I think as people have started to do more with their IT systems, and the workloads we're seeing are growing exponentially, driven by virtualization, I think. So virtualization, when it first came to the market, was typically seen as a consolidation tool.
Yep.
But as well as providing for consolidation, it actually enabled the customer to create a much more agile environment. Instead of waiting maybe 6 weeks to get a server up in the data center, it's a matter of minutes to do that. And I think that's fueled an absolute growth in workloads. So in doing that, I think the industry had to take stock of the customer that had been buying servers and then storage, and then more servers and then some more storage, and maybe buying a discrete platform for a particular application area or area of the business. So converged systems was about taking standard building blocks, server, storage, networking, and providing them in a supportable way to support a particular application. So it was partly configuration to handle a specific workload, but then with other software tools, in the case of HP, things like OneView, to manage that as an entity. And obviously Hyper-Converged is taking that to another level today.
So what have we got? This system designed as software defined.
So we kind of took stock of our storage business and how it had evolved to meet customers' needs. Some needs are driven by performance, some by cost. Some customers are looking at flexibility and agility, and certain workloads can be delivered, we think, optimally in different ways. So, partly marketing, I guess, to put some definition around it, but I think it's quite clear. We have systems like 3PAR. In the mid-range and enterprise, we have our MSA storage, entry-level traditional storage systems. And back, as you know, in 2008, the company I worked for, Left Hand Networks, we'd actually taken software as the intellectual property to deliver the solution on standard x86 platforms as the underlying hardware, hence software defined. And it's this capability that's kind of morphed its way into a hyper-converged platform today.
Tony, why do we have to think about this right now? Is this an urgent thing?
It's urgent in as much as the way infrastructure is changing, but particularly the business pressures are putting on the way we use IT. So that's the reason for now. There's a lot of external pressures on what we need to do, so delivering quicker, keeping things easier to manage because we've got so much to do. Despite the whole consolidation that Marcus mentioned having taken place, we're still generating more and more systems. So we might be doing it on fewer and fewer boxes, but actually simplifying things and what we do and how quickly we can manage, how automatically we can manage is really key to everything.
Yeah, now you set out in your nice boxes here, Marcus, exactly why now is an important time for this, in your opinion.
So I think now comes from two areas. One, can we deliver this capability? And I think we have the technology to do that, and I think we talked about that earlier. We've got the CPU power within the server platforms to deliver storage services and applications. If we think back to how external storage systems came about, initially it was to handle clustered applications and actually offload the storage processing from the application platform. The current level of CPU power they have today, we're actually able to put that load back on the server and consolidate it. 80% of workloads today are virtualized. But I think so that's the why from a technology perspective. Why now? I was talking with one of our partners last week about this subject, and he said, I was reflecting on it with one of my mid-range customers. He said, he talked about the number of workloads he was running before he virtualized. He said, I had 27 servers in my data center. So a typical mid-sized business, I would say. I think 300-400 users. And he said, well, how many virtual machines have you got today? He said, wow. He said, 500. So, over time, it's kind of crept up on customers, and I think many customers now are probably into their second iteration of looking at the infrastructure that supports their virtual compute. Projects in the early days were quite specific, weren't they? They were about taking probably your tier 2, tier 3 applications, the low risk things, and the virtualization project was quite specific. We're going to take these physical servers, virtualize these workloads, and determine what the storage looks like today. Another customer, we went to talk to them, they'd started that process, actually a spread betting company, and that they'd evolved into having 14 or 15 different pools of mid-range storage, actually not HP, as I hasten to add, but our blade storage. And now they're looking at taking that whole environment and recognizing that they have to simplify it, because hundreds of workloads, they can foresee maybe thousands of workloads in the next 5 years. So I think those are the compelling reasons at the customer level for reviewing that today. And I think as people do more with something, as we're looking for further efficiency, sometimes we have to maybe come up with something that might not be as flexible or appear as flexible, but actually gets the job done in a simple fashion, so companies can actually focus on what IT is really about, and that's delivering applications that drive the business.
Hang on, Tony. We've been doing Reg Cash for a couple of years, talking about how people need agility in their IT systems and things like this. Are we reversing on that?
No, because we still need the agility. But the point is, we're running a lot of different workloads. Many of which do fit into this type of platform. So they're not the edge cases. So they are the bulk of the things that we do every day, day after day, so that we've got a pretty good handle on them and what we need for them. But there's another factor about the why now that's coming into play, and that's we know from the register audience that a lot of the folks out there have infrastructure that isn't all, bought yesterday.
Yeah.
It goes back, years and years, so that they have a range of different equipment in their data centers.
One thing we learned from the Reg audience is how much they'll put up with.
And much of it, of course, is reaching end of life. Now, with converged systems in the past, they were maybe generation 1, and some people are ready to leap on generation 1, others aren't. We're now, sort of in generations 2 and 3, so that when we are refreshing the physical infrastructure underneath things, the new options that are there are not so new anymore, and we've got a lot more trust in them. So that will have an effect on what gets replaced as we go forwards. Again, with that simplification in mind and flexibility.
So it's time, right? So we say, it's time to have a look, take a step back, have a look at what you've got now, because this might be the time to start thinking about it in this way. Okay, so let's have a look at exactly what hyper-converged is, because I mean, you touched on it, Tony, in the video, but it's the question I asked when we first started this is, what's the difference? We're talking about converged. What's hyper-converged? You said you take the hype out of hyper-converged.
Well, the interesting thing was when I saw these platforms first come to market. I think there were some stealth companies back in 2009, 2010, launched products in 2011 in startups, and when I looked at it, I thought, well, that's just storage software running on a virtual machine inside a standard server. What's the big deal? So then I thought, well, what does hyper in hyper-converged mean? Well, the dictionary definition, I think, means high energy. So when I did the research, I came back, actually it was a term that was only defined in 2012. I think Aaron Taneja is looking for the credit in terms of using that term.
Someone's always looking for the credit for these things.
First of all. So what is it? Very simply, if we take a virtualized server, so standard computer running a hypervisor, we can actually deliver the storage services from storage software, hence the term software-defined storage. So all of the storage services you need in terms of pooling, creating volumes, all the good things we want from mid-range storage arrays, replication, snapshots, application integration, all that good stuff. Running on software, utilizing the storage of that server, whatever that may be, along with some management capability to manage this as a virtual compute device as opposed to a storage and a server. And that's it. So you're buying a block of virtualized compute instead of buying servers and storage. It's that simple. These systems scale. If you need more, you buy another one. So the scalability is quite linear. So we're actually adding compute and storage together. Typically, we can talk a little bit about things we do differently later on, but the basic principle is we've simplified how we buy the solution. We've simplified how we deploy it. And the trade-off is clearly, we haven't got the ability, it seems on the surface, to adjust compute and storage moving forward. But we've got a predictable way of deploying infrastructure. I would think for a large proportion of the virtual compute workloads that customers have today.
Tony, you and Dale were arguing about this, weren't you?
Dale and I debated this, quite extensively.
Over the
course of 2.5, 3 hours, one Monday morning, and we finally reached a consensus that the converged side was really about creating these appliances, so everything integrated together, but with the focus looking at managing it, from the hardware components down, whereas the hyper-converged is really, as Marcus said, looking at it from the virtual system down. So that's your management platform point of entry. And everything underneath that is hopefully hidden, whereas before the management tools, took care of the integration underneath there. That was already there. But you were still looking at managing it at a relatively low level. Right, so just above the hardware rather than at the ins and outs of the hardware. Now you're looking at managing it from the virtual machine side, so the virtual service that's being delivered. That's the entry point for the management.
Okay. I think I've got it. If any of you haven't got it, then ask about it and I'll explain it again.
If anyone disagrees with me.
If anyone, we're going to get one in from Dale, won't we? He occasionally takes part under an assumed name, I'm sure, yeah.
Actually, this is Dale's definition.
It's not often you lose an argument on these things.
Very true.
So if we're looking at if we look at the attributes, this is basically what we're saying. The software-defined storage, the virtualized servers together.
Yes.
Yeah. Managed together. Now, this means that. So you're saying that it's scalable?
Absolutely.
Give us a definite. Give us a.
So depending, in theory, architecturally, this, you could say unlimited. In practical terms, we're looking at typically scaling the hardware nodes in line with the capability of the virtualization. So typically today, I think VMware supports is a cluster of about 32 servers, I think something like that. So we would see that would be the scale of a single pool to manage would be about 30 up to about 32 platforms, which is a lot of compute and storage. So we, depending on the type of deployment, whether it's the hardwired appliance or some of the things we'll talk about later with our software, this could be systems supporting up to 3/4 of a petabyte of highly available storage and 32 powerful servers in a single pool of management. So pretty substantial. That's going in direction upwards. Clearly, there are plenty of customers that are saying, well, that's fine, but how low can we go? And in the other end of the spectrum, once again, with some of the software capability we have, we can be building down systems to literally a couple of one-use servers and a few terabytes of storage, and maybe running, 10 virtual machines. Is there any
point in doing that?
Interestingly enough, we see, I think as turnkey solutions for small businesses that maybe have 10 workloads to run, we can deliver a turnkey solution through our partners. The other use case I'm seeing actually are in the enterprise within remote branch office. There are organizations I've dealt with in the past, particularly in, say, retail, where actually they have quite some applications that they deploy in store. Those applications are important for revenue generation and customer reputation. They want these things to run, and being able to create a virtualized environment that's highly available, because that's the way that we write data within a software-defined world, because we always write to more than one server, because servers only have one controller in there in terms of physical terms. So there are use cases for very small environments for this stuff, and I think in mid-sized organizations, I think there's a requirement for some reasonable scale as well in the upwards direction.
We don't hear the phrase turnkey very much anymore, so it's a pleasure to have it back. Yeah.
I think that there's
just age, I'm afraid.
You're showing your background.
There's one other element that I think that could apply, at that smaller end, and that's the fact that some workloads will be moving over to run on centralized systems that previously haven't, and that's desktop virtualization, which is slowly creeping in, and obviously that's putting in a central server load that wasn't there before. So that could play with this. The only argument I have with this particular slide is that it says scalability is linear. It's nearly linear. There are overheads in terms of the network connections and all of this stuff in there. So
I'm glad you mentioned the word networks, because it's the thing we're not talking about very much at the moment. Where does networking fit into the picture is the question that's come in.
It's actually an integral part of what's going on here, because without good network control, actually managing all of these things and switching them around and putting in that flexibility is very, very difficult. So having some form of network management, network virtualization built into these platforms, so that an IT generalist can look after them without having to spend several hours working out how am I going to change the network connectivity here. This takes away a lot of the pain there.
Yeah.
So the network for these systems is we use standard 10 gigabit networking. within the hyper-converged appliance, obviously from a software-defined perspective where we can build a more bespoke solution that doesn't have to be 10 gigabit, that could be 1 big gigabit standard networking as well. So the back-end network is a standard Ethernet 10 gigabit network.
But it's the management of the network that's the really important thing, and getting that all automated within the platform so that you don't have to physically sit down as you change the virtual machines and change all of the services running on top of it. You don't have to sit down and work out, well, what are the networking implications of this, and physically change the networking, let the system manage that for you.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely right. Let's have a look at the business drivers on this. I mean, these are all things that people say, "Oh, yeah, of course we'd like those."
Exactly, and sometimes these slides can start to look quite generic. Nobody wants a complicated system. No one wants to increase cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Innovation's quite good.
Please tell us why.
But so the real issue is, how does a hyper-converged platform align to these pretty generic desired goals? Mm-hmm. So one of the things another partner of mine was talking about last week was when we talked about, we ran through this proposition, and I said, ease of procurement. He said, actually, you're absolutely right. He said, but where procurement struggles with traditional IT is, what am I getting for my money? And with a hyper-converged solution, you can literally put the box on the table and say, for X thousands of pounds, you will get a system completely ready to run Y number of virtual workloads. And procurement gets that. And what happens when I need some more? You buy another one, and we know how much. So cost control and growth becomes predictable. There's also the opportunity not to do what people have a habit of doing with storage today, is they treat storage like a loaf of bread in a freezer, and that they fill up their freezer with loaves of bread that they could quite happily go down to the supermarket and buy on a daily basis. So I think, because of the complexity of systems, people tend to overbuy. And I think if you actually understand what your upgrade path looks like, and actually from a deployment perspective, it's simple to upgrade when you need it, hopefully people will start to buy what they need now and plan for the future on paper, and not necessarily by loading their data center up with equipment. So I think that's an important point.
The problem with that, of course, is that many IT budgets are still not set up to work in this, on-demand type fashion of procurement, because it's still often project funded. Yeah. And the project is for now, it's not for incremental upgrades going forward. So when we talk about upgrading these platforms and add another one, that's capacity inside the the hyper-converged infrastructure, rather than buying another hyper-converged box. Well, of course, once you filled it up, then you've got to.
Yes.
But it's really about having the ability to increment it when you need to, but we know from the red readers that often their budgets still need some adaptation to be able to do this properly. It's a bit like thin provisioning on the storage side. Great in theory, still difficult for some companies to actually get to grips with in terms of their financing and how they pay for IT internally. That needs to change, absolutely. So some of the finance guys are beginning to get it and can see, that it's the net present value and all this sort of stuff of deferred payments and whatever. But again, they still need some philosophical changes in the way IT and the business work together, and the way the funding works.
So we can have a conversation around this with procurement. They might, that getting procurement to change the way they're viewing at these things is part of getting to the success of hyper-converged.
Also, to present it as an opportunity to procurement, as value add, to say, actually, we've been forcing IT to come up with these big budget projects to get money from the business to fund something because they worry they're not going to get it in the future. This kind of technology enables us to approach it in a different way. Let's have a look at the benefits. We know that over time, we get more for our money with infrastructure. Does it make sense to actually, have these big project budgets and actually find a way of dealing with it in a different way? So I think that does align well to a different conversation, at least.
Yeah. Economically, it makes lots of sense. It's just getting the process changed, the budget process changed.
Yes. Okay.
Which is not easy.
No, it's not easy, and it's not easy, and it's not going to be quick. But this is a reason to start that conversation.
And there are lots of other reasons wrapped around the whole way business is working, and wants to have avoid cost as much as possible, but that means that we need to change the way the budgets work.
As
We've
you-
been saying this for some time, but it's
You've been
becoming
saying it.
really critical now.
You've been saying it ever since I know you. I've
Yep.
known you, and it's it's one of those things where if you start talking about sort of chargeback and all those sort of things, absolutely good. Well, so now let's have a look at how this works in practice, as in what you would buy, and how it works from the HP's end.
Okay, so it's the only product slide I've got. So this is what's on the truck from our perspective.
Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to go back to work if you didn't do this.
I wouldn't be going back to a job if I hadn't come in to actually talk about what we've actually got. But from my perspective, actually, I think we're in a great place in terms of a broad offering that actually, embraces this concept of hyper-convergence without actually limiting the customer to buying just a box that can scale. So we have a hyper-converged platform today, which we call the CS200HC. There's a clue in the name as to what it is. Powered by our store virtual software. So that's the software that's providing the storage services on the box. It's a 2U high density system that actually has 4 pretty high-powered servers within it, and this is the building brick of our offering. And that system can either be with regular hard disk or a hybrid system with flash and regular drives. In the hybrid system, that box would support about 144 virtual machines of an average workload. Actually, we ran some performance tests independently with the evaluator group, and that's where those numbers come from. And depending on the workload of a VDI workload, that would support between 300 and 600 users. So that's our hyper-converged offering. Today, it's a VMware-based hypervisor platform. But we take exactly the same software, so the store virtual SAN appliance software that we've actually been shipping we announced it at VMworld in 2007, long before actually probably the hardware was there to support it, but conceptually it's the same software. But this is our open and flexible platform. So any hypervisor, any x86 server, we'd much rather it was a ProLiant server, and we think we've got some pretty good reasons why that's the case, and we've got the world's leading server. But
you got that one. I got that one saying it quickly before I could stop you. Yes, but other servers are available.
Other servers are available. Absolutely. So any hypervisor. So we support VMware. We support Microsoft Hyper-V. On the Helium platform today, we support KVM, so expect to see a KVM Red Hat version of the software imminently. I'm not supposed to talk about futures either, apparently, but it's it's definitely there and deliverable on the Helium platform today.
I think it may have slipped out then.
I think it's out there now.
That's good.
Good.
So that's it. So as well as supporting multiple hypervisors, with no lock-in on the hardware platform either, means we can actually design systems that are much more flexible in terms of capacity and performance. So some applications might need very high performance. We can deliver an all-flash solution today. We actually have a software license per server up to 50 terabytes. So if you've got applications that are actually much more capacity intensive rather than I/O intensive, we can deliver solutions there as well. One of the criticisms of a hyper-converged platform is that actually it scales linearly from a CPU and storage perspective. We actually have the traditional store virtual iSCSI SAN solution, once again runs exactly the same software, scales in the same way, and you can actually build clusters of store virtual storage alongside your hyper-converged platform and actually provide extra storage capacity using exactly the same storage management tools. It's in a very integrated fashion. In fact, I had an order last week from an FE college that has replaced their traditional virtualization platform with a couple of hyper-converged boxes and a couple of our hybrid storage store virtual solutions to expand the storage capability of that platform, all working using exactly the same management tools.
Totally. Vendor lock-in is something that people are afraid of when they come to these.
It's always a concern in every acquisition in IT and indeed beyond IT, but particularly in IT where standards
something in this
and
where you're making quite a big bet.
And it's a case of, well, okay, people like the idea of the simplicity in the appliance, but one of the inhibitors is, well, okay, I've now got this, device, but I'm locked into only using this device and nothing else.
Yeah.
So what people really want is the ability to, use devices like this. So appliances, very simplified, very easy to procure, very easy to scale, but maybe have a bit more openness, or at least a perception that they can spread out beyond just the one supplier if they need to. And that's an issue that time after time I found, both when I was a real IT guy and in my 3 years working on the dark side as European pre-sales guy, that if you can show people that you're not locked in, or you've got at least the potential to move outside of it, then they're much more comfortable making the initial purchase.
Yes.
And so that's an issue here, that if you can convince them that, yep, okay, you've got this, and if you want to scale in this appliance, fine, but if you've got other stuff already, you can integrate it as part of that overall management platform that you have for looking after, because otherwise you're just creating another silo.
Yeah.
And you want to not have a silo effect as much as possible.
Yeah. On a not exactly the same but slightly related point here from David. Yeah, so argument against them provisioning, saying after 1 or 2 years vendors have normally moved on with their product, so you can't add more resource to a partially filled box, which is why you buy more than you need.
Well, that's one thing, but usually the thin provisioning solutions keep pace with the new underlying hardware technology. So I think that might be a case in some scenarios, but generally maybe it isn't. But the biggest reason why people over-provision today has always been the fact that we're not quite sure what we're going to need tomorrow. And traditionally, actually scaling up has been difficult and adding capacity has been hard to do. So therefore, we buy as much as we can afford today in the hope that A, it's enough, and B, we know that it's certainly good enough for now, rather than having the budget holder come along to us and say, hey guys, you bought something and it's running like a three-legged donkey with two of its legs tied down, because you've under-provisioned it, and that's a disaster. If the service isn't good on day one, it's a disaster. That's why we've always over-provisioned, plus that's when we have the money to do the provisioning. Coming back and saying, please sir, can I have some more in IT, hasn't often worked.
Yeah, absolutely. Marcus, I've got a question for you here. You got OpenStack and Converged system on the same slide. Would customers use these together, or are they alternatives? And how does the compatibility of store virtual software compare with Swift OpenStack environment? OpenStack questions.
There's about 3 questions in one.
Yes, there are, and you've got to answer all of them.
So our strategy from a management perspective is, if you like, we've got traditional management of converged systems using OneView as our upper layer of management. The Helion OpenStack system can be a front end to a traditional environment, or it can be its own system. I think if that answers the question. In terms of so within the Helion OpenStack block level drivers, which I think Cinder, is that correct?
Hey, you don't look at me.
I'm looking at Tony, I think is the Cinder driver.
Yeah, well, there are several, but
actually, the store virtual VSA licenses are provided with our distribution to enable you to build out the block level backend storage for your Helion environment.
The idea behind OpenStack is that obviously it's an open standard, so that in theory you can plug anything in that you want underneath it. So if it's an OpenStack implementation, then you can put any hardware that you like underneath that. But again, that takes time and skill and resource to do, and not many people have got the time to really get into the innards of OpenStack, because it's, again, not a single standard, it's lots of them. There are lots in there that you need to get to grips with, which is why buying some sort of OpenStack as an appliance that's fully supported is perhaps easier for more people to get into. The ones that really do have the time and the business advantages of doing something themselves, they can afford to get the resources and the skills to do that. Everyone else tends to want to have something prepackaged for them. But if it's OpenStack, then it will support anything in theory that OpenStack will do underneath it. You've just maybe got to do a bit more work to get it in there.
Good work, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, those hard questions. Now let's have a look of what it's good for, but I'm also interested in, we're also going to look in examples of what this is good for and what it's not good for in the next couple of slides.
Absolutely.
So, what's it good for?
So we see that within most customer sizes there will be some form of use case for quite a large number of workloads. So typically in mid-size organisations we see that IT these days, number one, they're involved in a lot more development of applications. So an IT person that we see is more going to be either a generalist supporting a virtualized compute environment. So they've probably become quite skilled in their VMware infrastructure and see things from that perspective. Or they're pretty well versed in their application areas. So we believe that a hyper-converged system that's simplifying the deployment and management of the underlying infrastructure makes sense to those organizations. In terms of the starting point for the hyper-converged platform, we'd say if you've got 50 virtual machines or above and you'll grow nicely into the initial offering, which is this 4-server unit, and typically supporting up to 400 plus, maybe up to 800 virtual machines. So typical mid-size organization IT consolidation. Within larger organizations we often see this particular line of business. Actually, I was with a very large customer the other day who was looking at building a small suite to demonstrate a number of business applications internally. And the CTO of the organisation said, this is a standalone department. Our resources go into managing applications that we're demonstrating back to the business. He said, but we want it on our own platform. I have no interest in deploying and managing a system. I think I need a hyper-converged system. I said, I think sounds a good approach for you. So they can deploy this box and then get back to business. So I think line of business in large organisations, maybe departments of a college that doesn't want to go to the central data centre services for everything, has application expertise, but certainly doesn't want to be concerned with infrastructure. And then within large enterprises, we're seeing global banks, looking at their, remote offices, massive data center capability, storage expertise, 6, 7 nines in the data center, but actually in a remote departmental location, they want something that can be deployed, can be shipped to site and deployed and managed simply. From a workload perspective, I think we talked earlier about, virtual desktop makes sense. There's an application that absolutely fits linear scalability because we're talking about rolling out multiple images of the same thing. And I think the majority of that application growth, when we talked about the customer that went from 27 physical servers to 500 virtual machines, the large majority of those workloads will fit nicely in that this generalized platform.
Okay,
it's good for many workloads. It's the edge cases that are not, the specialist niche areas that have always needed special things set out for them.
And so let's have a look at those for so what's it not good for?
So this is my slide for the startup organizations, which I've worked for as well. You have a solution and your solution you believe is the answer to all problems.
Sell it to everybody.
So when you've only got a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, is the adage. And the market, I think, there are a couple of really hot areas for storage today. We see that flash is definitely grabbing people's attention. Performance is an issue for storage. Storage was the bottleneck often in organisations, and we see flash eliminates that bottleneck very, very simply. And there's plenty of organisations that will tell you that flash is the answer to all problems. The other hot area is hyper-converged solutions. Those that seem to be where all of the startup money's going. And they'll tell you that a hyper-converged platform is the answer to all solutions. And the truth lies somewhere between the two, we believe, today. And
the truth is, it's not. Yeah, it's not. Okay, so we're not. So what would you, if you went to see me and I described a problem, would you say, nah, we're not going to do hyper-converged for that?
So if you ask me the question, tell me why I should buy a hyper-converged system, my answer would be, right now I'm not certain you should. Let's find out what you're trying to do. So, from HP's perspective, we clearly have a broad range of solutions. We talked earlier about our three-part system-based storage and there's software-defined. So, firstly, if your application's not virtualized, either because it's a small discrete application or it's an application that requires dedicated systems and performance, high levels of service level, quality of service, then you're probably looking at a dedicated storage platform.
Yeah.
And today, I would be saying you should seriously be looking at that dedicated storage platform being based on all-flash technology. That would be the primary mover. Today we can deliver. If we deliver 5 nines within a hyper-converged environment, there are customers where actually 5 nines isn't good enough. They want 6 nines reliability, and once again, that's where we look at a dedicated platform.
And it's outside the
There may be applications, you're not going to put large-scale file level collaboration. We've talked a lot about block level storage today. That's, most people's data sits in files and used for collaboration. I don't believe a hyper-converged platform makes sense there, and typically a dedicated file-serving platforms what the customer needs there. So, I think we talked earlier about the drivers from a technology perspective and where things are going. We're really talking about satisfying this massive growth in virtual compute, general workloads, and not large transactional database systems.
And that's it, flipping it around, away from the storage side, looking at it from the application level. If you're doing HPC, if you're doing high performance computing, this is probably not the way for you.
Yeah.
Way too expensive, and the performance is not going to be as good as you can get by doing something dedicated. So, and again, particularly the transaction processing, very fast real-time analytics, big data, things like this, probably not a good case. You could do it, yeah, but not as well as you could do it, or as cheaply as you could do it with something else, something dedicated. So it's just a case of working out, does your workload fit this generalized environment? If it does, great. If you need the edge cases, the ones that do have very, very specific requirements that don't fit in this performance envelope, then you go somewhere else. But that's always been the way with IT.
Yeah. Now let's have a look. That last few minutes, Marcus, take us through this. About the choices you make and how you build.
So we've built this diagram here just to really map storage solutions onto business priorities. So cost, agility, flexibility, performance. So on the left-hand side, where we think that performance, service level is critical. That's where our three-part store serve product sits. And on the right-hand side, where we'd see that cost and flexibility may be the drivers, we see that where we're erring towards a software-defined solution. In terms of how we deliver that, we can deliver them as storage only capabilities, or as a converged system solution. On the left as a traditional server and storage converged platform, or on the right hand side, if you just flick onto the next slide, as the hyper-converged platform. Across both of those systems, we want to provide a consistent approach to data protection. We haven't talked about that today, but regardless of the size of primary storage system, we want an appropriate protection platform as well, and that's our Store Once storage appliance data protection platform, which we deliver both in physical storage appliances and as a virtual SAN appliance solution as well, alongside. So we have a Store Virtual Primary Storage VSA and a Store Once Data Protection VSA. And wrapped around all of that, management capability, and really very simple, a traditional approach to IT with our HP OneView management platform, or delivering these solutions as a cloud-based platform with OpenStack. And finally, wrapping around that moving forward, federated data services, so we can actually start to move workloads around. Today, we can move workloads around in a federated way around 3PAR environments. We can do that amongst store virtual-based systems, and the plan moving forward in terms of a strategy is to be able to do that between traditional and software-defined based platforms in the future.
Well, that's, yeah. Good.
Tony. A couple of things to add on that. Two things that are really important and are often overlooked in the whole converged, hyper-converged space. One is the data protection side.
Yes.
Because data protection usually is always an afterthought. We bought the system, how do we protect it, rather than thinking about it up front. So getting those data protection understandings built in when you're actually going through the whole procurement process is really important. But again, traditionally, it's always been something that you think about after you've actually got the system in and running quite often. So the guys actually doing the whole procurement phase and the system design are not often tasked explicitly with making sure that this thing is looked after properly over its lifetime. Especially now when you're getting into a position where you could be running several different types of workload on the single platform, each of which has slightly different data protection requirements. So it's really important to think about that up front. And the last one is that overall management side. You don't want to just build new silos of infrastructure. Well, if you're just a single business and you've just got everything running in your one silo, fine, that's okay. But ultimately, you want this to be part of your bigger management process, so that make sure that it is integrated with everything else, so you don't end up with yet another island, a big island, but it's still an island.
Yeah. Okay, so 1 minute wrap up, guys. Marcus. Where do you start then? So we've got our audience. We've been watching this and they're thinking, I'd really like to go out and get started on this project now. We put it off for long enough. What should they do?
First of all, come and talk to us, because I think as I said, I think we've got more than just hyper-converged to offer. We have a very mature software stack in this space. We're in version 12 of the software. It's proven. From my perspective, the hyper-converged offering is just the next generation of our software-defined offering. So come and talk to us about it, but we're not going to beat you over the head with it, because it might not be the right solution to your business. So talk to HP first. You'll get a balanced view of the requirement. We're very enthusiastic about our position in this particular marketplace, but we're also very enthusiastic about having leading solutions in both of the important areas of the market today.
Tony, what should people be doing?
Well, you can probably guess that I always say we'll start from looking at where you are now. That's traditional, I've got to say that. Yeah. But it really comes down to, okay, it sounds interesting, but what's going to be my business case trigger for actually making the change? So it's working out what's the advantages that materially I can sell to the procurement guys, that I can sell to the budget holders, so that they can understand what's in it for us now. Okay. That's often the big part.
All right, thank you very much, guys. We have to wrap up there. Thank you, everyone, for your questions today. There was some good questions, testing questions, I think it's fair to say, wasn't it? And so thanks for asking them. Remember, you can get hold of these slides, look at some of these links. That would be very good. And remember also that we've got a little survey that you can fill in as well. For our Regcast, remember, always get in touch with us and tell us whether you liked what you heard and whether you'd like to hear something different, because we do read your comments and we will do more of what you like in the future. But from the guys in the studio today, from Marcus and Tony, and from me, Tim Phillips, goodbye.